Chapter 2. Completed. At the top of the White Lady, there is a simple altar, where pilgrims from all over Thanae come to make their offerings at the end of spring. Fragment of book, Thanae's famous places. Author, Nalan Turco. Without having the weight of the stone on his back, the descent was much easier. But it took him all morning to reach his base camp located on the shore of a small lake that the locals called the Frozen Pool, although contrary to what its name indicated, its waters were thermal, so they were always ready for bathing. It was a lonely place, although everyone in Vale Nevodo knew it. Very few ventured to climb so high through the lush forests that grew on the slopes of the White Lady. Spring was advancing and the weather was starting to get hotter. Agnoruk remembered when he was a child and ran through these mountains completely naked following the course of the Dragon River, whose source was the Frozen Pool. It descended until it reached a rock formation that dominated the road to Vale Nevodo. Its name was the Stone Dragon. According to what they said in Vale Nevodo, a long time ago the stone was a terrible dragon that a magician turned into a rock. Now it would guard the entrance to Vale Nevodo until the end of time. An idea crossed his mind. He took off his clothes and began to run down the river quickly. As he jumped from rock to rock following the course of the water, he remembered the good old days of childhood before things got complicated. Those distant years, when life was just getting up day after day to train and play with his few friends. Many adventures lived in this area. The journey was much shorter than he remembered, and there was the great stone dragon. Agnoruk rushed towards him and with an imposing leap hit the dragon's head with his leg, who impassive as always received the impact while the half-orc fell to the ground. Agnoruk slowly sat up celebrating his victory as when he was a child, but unlike then, he decided to quickly disappear from the road in case any traveler saw him naked. The descent was fun, the ascent not so much. The ascent to the pool was a bit long. When there were a few meters to reach the camp, he detected an unmistakable aroma, white wolves from the mountains. After a long winter they were hungry. Contrary to what many think, they are usually very silent when they want to corner a victim. Agnoruk hurried his pace. He had to reach the camp where he had at least a knife to be able to defend himself, but the wolves were clever and cut his way. A huge white wolf appeared in front of him who was supposed to be the leader of the pack. At the same time he was surrounded by 5 more wolves. Agnoruk knew that backing down or trying to escape was his death sentence. He stared into the eyes of the great white wolf and slowly approached. The animal showed him its enormous fangs, but the half-orc was not daunted and did the same. Some large fangs, which have nothing to envy to those of the wolf, appeared to face his rival. They came face to face, and it was then that Agnoruk addressed the great wolf. You have years of happy life in this forest hunting and taking care of your pack. Today's fight will only shorten the lives of both. Do you think my mother will allow me to die today? When he finished his sentence, Agnoruk's black eyes shone slightly, then the great wolf stopped growling and approached meekly, allowing the half-orc to caress him affectionately. He was then surrounded by the rest of the wolves who licked him as one of their own. He had long since understood that his mother's inheritance gave him a number of rare abilities that set him apart from the rest of the people of Thanae, but he had scarcely delved into them, knowing that his semi-divine nature had allowed him to wound the Soul Eater, to be able to easily detect and kill vampires, and to have some ability to heal or predict the future. What he had done now with the wolves was something he intuited, but it was the first time he had done it consciously. He was afraid of so much power and could not control it, which is why he had secluded himself in those mountains of his childhood. It was very difficult for him to accept his inheritance and live with others. It was too much wear and tear. He said goodbye to the wolves, who went in search of another prey and arrived at their camp, after a relaxing bath in hot springs. He dined on some dried sea snake meat with bitter black tea and finally slept under the watch of the 2 moons and the star Aldebaran that began to shine in the sky, indicating the arrival of summer. The memories crowded in the mind of the half-orc until he fell asleep. The next morning I would walk back home after a week away. Her home was located on the outskirts of Vale Nevodo. A cabin embedded in the slope of the White Lady, a lonely place since few people from the valley came to this area. According to them, a witch lived in the place. The advantage is that the witch had raised Agnoruk since he was a baby. She was a blind dwarf named Daora, who when her father left in search of adventures she took care of the little half-orc. After his death, only he and his father remained, until Agnoruk began to accompany him on his adventures and they left Snowy Valley. Even so, superstitions continued and it was not a place for the locals to venture. The half-orc crossed a wooden bridge, which they called the Bridge of the Dwarf. The most superstitious called it the Bridge of the Blind Witch. After walking 50 meters, there was a detour to the right of the main road. He walked for a long time in the forest until he reached a clearing where a huge oak tree stood out above the entire landscape. The clearing ended in a smooth wall of white granite more than 100 meters high, which stood out on the slope of the White Lady. There, in the middle of the clearing, there was a simple cabin of wood and stone, with a black slate roof and a huge window. Agnoruk walked slowly towards the house. He had a visitor. There were 3 horses and 2 mules grazing quietly. They were not his. The chimney of the house emitted white smoke. The unexpected visitor had taken too much confidence. Agnoruk stopped at the oak tree. Next to the trunk there were 5 stones nailed to the ground like tombstones. The half-orc knelt down and closed his eyes. Then he got up. This visit was something he had been waiting for a long time. For if he did not go in search of his destiny, it would be fate that would go in search of him. Cerberus came running to where the half-orc was. The dog's 2 heads licked Agnoruk with joy, which were reciprocated by a few caresses from the half-orc, although he had certainly not protected the hut very well. Agnoruk sat up and examined the horses. 2 of them were graceful steeds for more or less expert riders. The other was a trotting mare of docile character suitable for one who did not like to ride at all, like himself. The 2 mules reminded him a lot of Kiona, Arian's traveling companion more than a decade ago. It couldn't be. Here it comes at last. That voice. Agnoruk turned his head. Someone came out of the cabin and rested his hands on the wooden railing of the porch. It was Arian. I could make out his brown hair, which was fluttering in the gentle breeze, and a small blue spherical jewel that surrounded his thin neck. The woman smiled when she saw him arrive. Agnoruk walked calmly toward his house. Arian came down from the cabin to meet the half-orc who was slowly advancing. They had not seen each other for more than a decade since their farewell in Almera. At Arian's warning, Kush, Vanis, and an unknown young woman came out of the interior. The Kendali knew the place well. 2 years before they said goodbye right here, when she and Gosberg returned to Almera while the half-orc chose not to accompany them. He had decided to retire and stay at his father's house. Arian quickly arrived to meet Agnoruk to hug him effusively. Arian looked very good. She was very tanned, probably because of the sun of Almera. Physically her condition was excellent. A neat brown mare stood out. Her brown eyes shone with the confidence of who was Elaban's messenger in Sharnaris. He couldn't help it. Arian kissed Agnoruk on the cheek. How much I have missed you, Agnoruk. The half-orc remained silent. The truth is that despite being separated they both knew each other's adventures. But Arian was much more informed than he was. Thanks to Sabu's return to the company 4 years ago and then a little later with the return of the Kendali and the talkative Denka, Arian obtained great information about the half-orc's adventures. Once Arian calmed down, the 2 walked to the cabin where the rest of the entourage was waiting for them. You are much thinner than before. You even look taller. Agnoruk smiled. He had undergone Spartan training these 2 years. He had lost volume, although in return his endurance, agility and fortitude were much greater than before. I've tried to correct certain things in my fighting style. Seriously? Well, it looks great on you. Kush was the first to come out to embrace the half-orc with the same effusiveness as Arian. The magician also showed an excellent appearance. He did not seem to pass time on his face. His beard, as always, was perfectly cared for. I'm so glad to see you, Agnoruk. Thanae, as usual with her, stayed in the background, only making a slight bow with her head. The last member of the entourage was missing, who slowly approached the height of the rest. Arian made the introduction to Agnoruk. Agnoruk, I introduce you to one of my most outstanding disciples, Anthra. The young woman, who must have been about 20 years old, approached the half-orc and made a solemn bow. An honor, my lord. The half-orc smiled amused. It seemed that the girl was in the presence of a sanctimonious or a mummy. They don't deserve them. How long have you had female disciples? Agnoruk turned in surprise to Arian. After returning the triumph of Elaban to the temple of Turk-Hymak. We managed to end the curse of the damned. Word spread far and wide, and many came to the temple to be initiated on the path of the Elaban priesthood, as in ancient times. The half-orc scratched his head. Priests of Elaban in Shanaris again. It was certain, without a doubt, that a new era was beginning and Arian was its chief architect. Arian is an example to everyone. I just aspire to serve her to the best of my ability, declared the young disciple. Agnoruk was unimpressed by feigned humility. Anthra was not as tall as Arian, but she had an elegant bearing. Her black hair was tied back and only a fringe that ran down her broad forehead stood out. Her blue eyes were vivid and they watched everything carefully. Yes, who would have thought when we met in that tavern in Xeres that you would end up being admired by all of Shanaris? Agnoruk declared. Arian began to laugh out loud to the amazement of Anthra, who was used to a much more solemn Arian. Damn Gosberg and its traps. Agnoruk smiled as he recalled that fight in Ordoni's tavern. I still don't know how we got out of that big troll shit alive. You know. A year ago we traveled to Tergir. Ordoni is still alive and he remembered us. And he was frightened again when he saw Gosberg again. Back? Yes, we wanted to see Caesarea and the temple where the jewel originated from again. Besides, I missed my home and wanted to join a remnant of Nilam with those of my parents. The half-orc understood Arian. She was very changed. Now it was noticeable that she knew the power and influence she had. When he left his side he didn't know the consequences of what he had done in Tripulia. Now he seemed to know exactly what he wanted to do. Everyone entered the hut. Agnoruk left his backpack next to the door. Thanae had taken the liberty of preparing dinner, for he knew full well where the half-orc kept things. It smelled good. The Kendali was an excellent cook despite the fact that many times the raw material she had was somewhat scarce. The half-orc approached the iron pot that was on the fire of the fireplace and smelled it. The aroma was unmistakable, a stew of batora, silka roots, dried chickpeas and salted sea snake meat. One of the half-orc's favorite dishes. My lord, I took the trouble to pick batora leaves and the silka roots that grow behind the house. You have done very well, Thanae. You haven't lost your faculties cooking. If the food is ready, it is better to sit down at the table. Arian added. Agnoruk's house was not prepared to receive such numerous visitors. It barely had 3 chairs and both he and Kush took a seat on 2 large and thick wooden blocks that they used as stools. The plates, glasses, and cutlery were enough for everyone. Thanks to a large wooden tank, they could drink water that came from a small spring that gushed from inside the white granite wall. The spring served to irrigate the small garden at the back of the cabin. Agnoruk was not an expert farmer, but he was skilled enough to grow batora, silka, silver, tomatoes, and spring onions in spring and summer. Just enough for their consumption. The rest of the food was obtained through hunting and fishing in the nearby area. To complete his diet he used barter on the rare occasions that he went down to Vale Nevodo. In exchange for tanned skins, he obtained meat from various salted animals and his favorite product, bitter tea. They had dinner with enthusiasm since the batora stew was quite good. More so for Agnoruk, who was used to the taste. For the rest, the batora, and especially the roots of silka, was a pleasant surprise since the texture of both vegetables was very soft and pleasant when cooked. complemented with the seasoned sea snake meat, gave a very characteristic flavor to the two vegetables. But no one except Kush tasted a piece of seasoned meat. It was too hard to chew. That was not a problem for the half-orc, who ate all the pieces he had on his plate, tasting them delicately. In addition, the fresh water from the spring was the ideal complement to the dish. When Vanus began to pick up the dinner dishes, Agnoruk at last asked about the fundamental question of the whole evening. "I don't think you came all the way here to eat cooked batora after a decade without seeing each other." Arian and Kush exchanged glances to see who was speaking. In the end the magician lowered his gaze, and it was the priestess who took the floor. "We need you to come back to the company, Agnoruk." The half-orc took a sip of water from his glass while silently watching Arian's eyes. Kush continued with the account of the events. Demember is again in danger. The new queen of Olbiana has once again made a pact with the dwarfs of the Dragon's Ridge and the kingdom of Scythia. A new iron war is about to begin. The Iron Wars, Olbiana and the dwarfs of the Ridge have always coveted the rich mines of Demember. Surely King Dasmir III needs the services of his favorite mercenaries again. Debok needs all available mercenaries. We have recruited all those who are free from Almera. But we need the best, Agnoruk. This time Olbiana is going all out to invade Demember. Again silence on the part of the half-orc. He was imperturbable by what the wizard was saying, which caused the bewilderment of the rest of those present. "You still have a 3-year contract with the company, and in the contract clause you signed before your departure it was clear that you could return in case of a manifest need on our part." The magician finished with his presentation. "And this is the case?" Agnoruk's question was simple, and he was looking for a sincere answer from his friends. Arian spoke again, moving a little closer to the half-orc. "That's right, the army they are preparing is impressive. The new queen wants a great victory to prove to her people that she is a worthy successor to the great monarchs of Olbiana." The half-orc drank again, then bit his lower lip. He had given his word to return after a while, and he was not one of those who used to break his promises. The half-orc had been sensing for a while that his time of solitude was about to end to his misfortune. "I do." He didn't seem very enthusiastic about uttering that word, but for those who knew him it was enough. Kush and Arian's faces showed immense joy. Ever since Gosberg proposed to count on Agnoruk again, the idea of reuniting the group had been the main illusion of the young woman and the magician. Although they had lived great adventures this last decade, they could not compare to that one with the half-orc. Kush pulled out his thick wizard's book. He showed Agnoruk the page where he had drawn a map of the continent of Youth. He pointed to where they were now and began to prepare the trip back to Almera. "Tomorrow we will leave for the port of Fisbanil, where a boat is waiting for us to return to Almera as soon as possible. I need 1 more day. I have to prepare the house for a long absence." No one discussed the half-orc's change of plans. If he needed 1 more day before leaving, they would grant it. But it was time to rest. Agnoruk gave up his bed for the women in the group. It was a big bed where all of them could sleep perfectly. They slept on the floor. Early in the morning Agnoruk began to prepare the house for a long absence. He got rid of all perishable food so that it would not rot inside the house. What he could not carry and was valuable, he left stored in an underground room under the hut, hidden by a double floor. Preparing the house for his departure was not an easy task. He invested a large part of the day and his guests helped him. They didn't have dinner until late at night. This time Vanus prepared some game meat with roasted silka roots, again a delight. It was no wonder that silka roots were one of the most widely used foods on the continent of Eut, complementing very well with any other ingredient. The young Anthra, totally exhausted, was the first to go to bed. The night was so good that the rest decided to go out on the porch to watch the stars shining in a cloudless sky. Agnoruk readied his old sword, Arian remembering the times when the half-orc cleaned the edge when the guard began, always first. Kush read and wrote things down in his book. Arian fiddled with his brother's blue jewel, when he touched it it sparkled lightly with a light blue light. Vanus called Kush. He needed his help to store some food in the saddlebags for the trip. Arian and Agnoruk were left alone. As the Baron shone high, the priestess noticed how Agnoruk observed the star. It was also typical of the half-orc when he stood guard, but he had never spoken to her about it. Temporarily, Agnoruk came out of his thoughts astonished. No one had ever told him that name without him mentioning it first, quite a surprise. Yes, how do you know that name? Loaf showed me this. It is also seen from Caesarea, especially on spring and summer nights. It shines brighter. It is the main one of the 3 stars. In Caesarea we call them the summer triangle. When they are most seen is in that season. The half-orc stopped cleaning the sword. It is true, there were 2 other stars that shone a little less than the star of the upper vertical. The 2 formed an equilateral triangle with the Baron, but his father never told him anything about the constellation. What do you know about the legend of the Baron? Arian smiled, stopped playing with the jewel. Loaf said that he was such a great warrior that the gods took him to fight alongside them and offered him to stay to be a god, but as the Baron rejected the offer, the hero returned to Shanaris to live as a mortal. He asked only one thing of the gods, to die against a worthy rival. A beautiful legend. Agnoruk whispered. Maybe it wasn't a legend, maybe it's a prophecy. The half-orc was silent. He was thinking of saying something, but he remained silent. Kush would return to sit down next to them again. It's a good night today, really. I didn't expect the temperatures in EU to be so pleasant, commented the magician as he lit his pipe. Winters are usually long and harsh, but spring and summer are usually very mild, although now I find that time passes faster. Agnoruk added. Tonight reminds me of the days on the way to Tame, only Gosberg is missing telling some of its crazy stories. Arian spoke with a smile on his face. Agnoruk smiled as he remembered those days, walking unhurriedly, safely in the sun, and at night the stars protecting a firelit camp from a simple bonfire while a drunken Denker told a story of robbery and deception of ruthless trolls. Good times without a doubt. The half-orc was also smiling. You know, we returned to the waterfall of 1,000 colors, although it was not the same. Agnoruk closed his eyes for a moment to visualize the memory more vividly. It is beautiful without a doubt, but seeing it just at dawn gives it a special charm. Arian didn't answer. Vanus appeared to indicate to the priestess that tomorrow they would get up early, so it was necessary to go to sleep. The priestess did not argue with the Kendeli. She said goodbye to the mage and the half-orc to retreat inside the hut. The 2 of them were left alone in silence. They would sleep on the floor of the cabin. Arian missed you. You know, your departure was a surprise to everyone. Kush had always gotten along well with the half-orc and needed to clarify the reasons for his absence from the company. It was necessary to leave. Staying would complicate things. I understand this perfectly, Agnoruk. Only that after what happened in Tripulia, separating the group in such an abrupt way was something that disappointed us all. Gosberg, Serbu, and Vanus left because they wanted to. I didn't force them. The half-orc defended himself. And everyone ended up coming back except you. The magician didn't think he would give up so easily. Agnoruk remained silent. The magician then continued with his speech. You had our door open, Gosberg came back, but you preferred to stay here isolated from the world when you have incredible talent. I don't think it was because of something random. Why are you secluding yourself here? The magician is always so observant and intelligent. Agnoruk put down his sword against the wall and stood up. I don't think I'm good for Shanaris. Kush was surprised at this revelation. He did not fully understand the half-orc's words. Don't be any good. I have the impression that if I express my full potential, many people will suffer. The mage imagined Agnoruk's suffering. He was the only mortal who had ever wounded a soul-eater. It was evident that he was not a mere half-orc. Agnoruk knew this too, but controlling that power involved many risks. Arian has always trusted you. The magician reassured him. Arian is Shannari's hope. Yes, but she can't do it alone. She needs you. Agnoruk shook his head. He was not convinced. He rejected that responsibility. Agnoruk, I ask of you only to protect Arian. She doesn't know it or says she is not afraid, but since removing the curse on Turkheimak she has stepped forward. According to her words, Shanaris is moving into a new era. An era of light and peace. That implies many changes and enemies that will go after her. Kush spoke in a very serious tone. For him Arian's life was extremely important. What do you mean? You remember the Dardra of the Temple of Elaban? Yes, of course, the Elven and Orc clans who refused to fight since they considered themselves brothers. And it is said that they escaped to the realms of the deep. That's right. Have you discovered anything else? Kush knew that Agnoruk had traveled a great deal throughout Shanaris in these years. Surely he would have obtained new information about the Dadara. Not much, the Kendalis don't mention them, but the Amazons say they were the only ones who didn't fight in the Orcish wars. In return for helping the Dada escape, the elves wanted to exterminate them all. Kush wrote down what Agnoruk told him in his book. When he finished, he showed a page of his book to the half-orc, who did not understand much of what was written there, since Kush used his native language in the book. Interesting, that fits me. According to the Amazons, the Dardra were not persecuted by the Orcs when they decided not to participate in the war. They accepted their decision. However, the elves came after them to exterminate them completely. They did not succeed. They were defeated by an alliance of Amazons, Kendalis and Denkis, while the Dardra fled to the depths of Shanaris. What's the point of that? Agnoruk's ramblings led him to a dead end. Kush shrugged, closing the book. Having explained his motives, he continued with the speech to convince Agnoruk. That's why you must protect Arian. Perhaps the protectors of Shanaris, the children of the gods, are not now what they say they are. What you say is crazy. I hope so. They both remained silent for a while longer and finally decided to go to sleep. Agnoruk did not sleep in the cabin. He decided to sleep next to the large oak tree where the tombstones of his parents, the blind dwarf, Emelian, and Cerberus' mother were. The two-headed dog slept next to the half-orc. He would stay as always, taking care of the house and waiting for his return, him or his cubs. Arian was in danger, although she did not consider it so. Protecting Elaban's chosen one and also her friend was something for which Agnoruk decided to come out of retirement. Although this implied fighting against the fear he had of not being able to assume the full power of being the son of the goddess of death, Thanae. At dawn they got up. The half-orc finished the tasks of preparing the hut for his absence. Arian knew very well that Agnoruk was careful to have everything ready in case he had to leave home unexpectedly, so it only took them a day to work. Once the house was prepared to Agnoruk's liking, it was time to leave. The whole group got on their chairs, except Agnoruk, who had to say goodbye to his dog with two heads. You can come with us if you want, Agnoruk. No, Cerberus is like his mother, he belongs to these mountains. He knows how to take good care of himself. In reality he is half a wolf. Sooner or later we will meet again in this house. The half-orc kissed the two heads of the huge dog that were moaning pitifully. Garak Utamara sake. The two-headed dog ran away, disappearing into the trees of the forest. Then the half-orc knelt before the oak stones, rested his hand on the ground, and closed his eyes. Arian came mounted on the mule until she reached the height of the half-orc. She had never seen him so sensitive, although of course this place was his home. Do you miss them? Only Cerberus' mother, Deora, and my mother are buried here. My father's tombstone and Emelian are only testimonials. They didn't die here. They remained silent. Everyone accepted that their world was so hard, and that is why they had in their memory many fallen companions and rivals far from home. To finish, he picked up his worn backpack. It was the same one that more than 3 decades ago he always used on his adventures. All that remained was to fasten the sword to his back. With some clumsiness he mounted the tame mare. He looked at his house one last time, spurred on his mount and trotted out of the place, the rest of the group riding behind him.